What's up, guys? Today I'm going to give you what I think is the best selection for every AFC team in the 2024 NFL draft. So let's get right into it. To start it off, the Buffalo Bills, my favorite selection was Cedric Van Prangranger, center out of Georgia. He started for 3 years along that Georgia offensive line, including two on those two national championship teams, and he's just a good player. He fell to the fifth round. I wasn't very surprised that he fell because he doesn't have the athletic upside that I think a lot of teams covet, but he's just solid. They cut Mitch Morse in the offseason, and their interior offensive line is not that strong either. So I think he can be a replacement to Mitch Morse, and I think there's definitely a path for him to be a decent starter in the NFL. Even though he may never be a Pro Bowler, I think he can still be a solid starter for the Bills, who need just solid players because of this retooling phase that they're going through. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. My favorite selection was Malik Washington, wide receiver out of Virginia. I wasn't a big fan of what the Dolphins did on day one and day two with Patrick Paul and Chop Robinson, just because I think they need help right now along both the offensive line and the defensive line. But they redeemed themselves at day three with the pick of Mo Kamara, the edge rusher out of Colorado State I really liked, and Malik Washington. Washington is just really good at everything. The thing is he's 5'8", so I'm not surprised he fell all the way to the sixth round. Although I don't think it should have been a thing because he's just so good, and I think he can have a very like carved out role in an offense. And I think the Dolphins are a perfect spot for him. They have Waddle and Hill who will account to like for like 2,500 to 3,000 yards of offense, and he can just kind of be playing that Braxton Berrios kind of role. He had a role in the offense last year, and I think he's Washington is even better than Berrios. So I'm excited to see what how he can be used in this Mike McDaniel offense. I'll start off the same way with the New England Patriots. Good job selecting Drake May. I'm glad they didn't mess around. If they thought May was their guy, then you almost have to select him. You don't know, excuse me, how many opportunities you're going to get selecting a quarterback like him. So, and that leads to my favorite pick, Jalen Polk, the wide receiver out of Washington. I was extremely high on Polk in the pre-draft process, although he doesn't have as high of a ceiling as like Xavier Worthy or a Xavier Legette or a Keon Coleman. I think his floor is higher than all of those guys, and I think that's what you need when trying to get playmakers for a rookie quarterback, guys that can be consistent and reliant. You look at last year, Bryce Young loved throwing to Adam Thielen. That's all he threw to, and I think that's a formula for success when setting up your rookie quarterback. The New York Jets, I just want to start off their first round pick, Olufushanu. Great pick. I'm really glad they picked him. They need insurance for Aaron Rodgers. You can't have him getting hurt again, and Tyron Smith goes down a lot. With that being said, I didn't want to pick up like the 11th overall pick as my selection because I feel like that's kind of a cop out. So I ended up going with Malachi Corley. I wasn't huge on Malachi Corley coming out of Western Kentucky, but I think he fits perfect in this offense. They have two traditional wide receivers in Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams, and Corley is stylistically similar to Debo Samuel. He's not obviously not as good. He went in the third round. If he was good, he'd go. If he was as good as Debo, he would have went in the top 10. But he gets manufactured touches like screens and sweeps and all that stuff. And I think that can be beneficial to Aaron Rodgers and the Jets offense because Rodgers does not like throwing to rookie pass catchers. It's probably just a trust thing, but getting Corley in this offense with manufactured touches, I think will be really beneficial because they needed a third wide receiver. As much as Rodgers loved Allen Lazard, he's just not going to cut it anymore. So good pick by the Jets with Corley. The Baltimore Ravens knocked this draft out of the park per usual. They always usually do really good. Nate Wiggins might be the best cover corner in the draft if you just ignore the tackling. And then TJ Tampa was a great pick in the fourth round. He was pretty like I think he is a third round type player. And Adisa Isaac is a good pass rusher at 93 overall. That's a good value, but I think their best pick was Devontae Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. Walker, he had a weird pre-draft process, I guess. I mean, he was like at Kent State. He was like the best player at Kent State, and then he transferred to North Carolina this year, and he had waiver transfer issues, so he didn't play for the second until the second half of the year, but he was pretty good. And then people were saying like, can this guy go in the first round, maybe high second round? And then the Senior Bowl hit, and he was really bad, and he dropped everything, and that knocked him down people's boards. However, I feel like there might have been an overcorrection because I this like a guy of this size and speed that has good production, they don't come around very often, and I like the value here in the fourth round, and it's going to be intriguing to see how he fits into this offense because how Lamar's not, doesn't have this type of receiver. Flowers, Aguilar, Bateman, they aren't these huge like X vertical stretching receivers. Maybe Bateman, but he's not huge. So I'm intrigued to see how he fits into this Baltimore offense. The Cleveland Browns didn't have a lot of selections in the draft, so it was hard to choose from. But I think my favorite by far was Zach Zinter, the guard out of Michigan. Zinter was a guy who I think easily would have been a second rounder if he didn't break. I think he broke two bones in his legs against Ohio State, and he's just a one of these solid day two interior offensive linemen. I don't really know what the outlook of his recovery process is, so I don't know if he can be a immediate contributor. But even then, Cleveland's offensive line is good enough where he probably won't have to be, but it allows them to get younger and cheaper at the position where they're going to need it because they're paying Deshaun Watson so much money. The Pittsburgh Steelers had maybe my favorite draft out of any team, especially in the first 2 days. Zach Frazier in the second round is a starting center that they got. And although I wasn't super high on Roman Wilson, a third round is good value for him, and he's a good, consistent receiver to pair with more of a wild card, streaky guy like George Pickens. But my favorite selection was Troy Fautanu, the offensive tackle, maybe probably an offensive tackle. He can play guard out of Washington. Fautanu is a guy that I thought was a top 10 guy in this process, mostly because I just thought he was good no matter where he played. He was going to be good. And I think that kind of turned teams off is that he was kind of a tweener between guard and tackle because he played a little bit of everywhere in Washington. But I think he can play either fine. I don't think it's like, I don't know where we can play him. I think we can play him either of these positions. And yeah, like I said, he was a top 10 player in this draft for me, and getting him at 20 is just excellent, excellent value. This one was kind of a weird one for me. The Bengals, I really like their draft, everything they did. I didn't, this guy, Jermaine Burton, I didn't love him coming out of the pre-draft process just because he had so many off the field issues that you're wondering if he can stick. But I like him with the Bengals. He's going to be their number three receiver at best with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and we all know that they don't want to pay T. Higgins. So you're taking a wild card in the third round, but he doesn't necessarily have to hit. You're not relying on him to hit, but if he does, that allows you to move on from T. Higgins. So I really like this process from the Bengals, and I'd like to come on their other picks as well. Chris Jenkins, Eric All, Amarius Mims is a great developmental tackle. So good job, Bengals. I'm not gonna lie, I was disappointed by the Texans draft. I didn't really love what they did. Kamari Laster in the second round is I in the at the 42nd pick, I don't really know. Blake Fisher, I didn't love that. Kalen Bullock, his tackling is a liability, like some of the worst I've ever seen for a top 100 draft pick. But with that being said, I like Cade Stover, the selection of Cade Stover in the fourth round. This is right where I kind of expected him to go, like somewhere maybe in the late third round to fourth round. And he's just a solid tight end. He doesn't really excel in pass catching or blocking, but I think he's decent in both. And he is went to Ohio State, so he was teammates with CJ Stroud for 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. So, and I just like the dynamic of him in that offense. He doesn't have to be a tight end one. Dalton Schultz is there, but he can be a reliable target for CJ Stroud. So, as much as I didn't love what the Texans did, this pick was I really liked. Next up is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I love this pick. I had a hunch that Thomas was going to go there. I had him going there at 17 in my final mock draft just because Trent Baalke loves this kind of guy, and would have to agree with him. Brian Thomas Jr. Personally might have been my favorite player in the draft. I really liked him a lot. I've been fooled by these big athletic wide receivers before, such as Quentin Johnston or N'Keal Harry, but I think Thomas might be different just due to the fact that he was so productive at LSU, and his speed isn't just like, oh, for his size, he's 6'4", he's fast. Like, he's legit 4'3" speed. That's fast for anyone of any size in the NFL. I wasn't necessarily a fan of what they did later in the draft, and I can't say I'm surprised because Trent Baalke, like I said, he gravitates towards these low floor, high ceiling, usually Southern players. They selected two more players out of LSU, one out of Texas Tech. Like, I don't know, this is just what they do. But I think the addition of Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be really helpful for Trevor Lawrence. And it's going to be interesting because my comp for Brian Thomas was just a better Gabe Davis, a Gabe Davis that was more like the one you saw in that playoff game rather than when he gets zero receptions a few weeks out of the year. So yeah, I'm just excited. I think he has the potential to be a number one receiver, and he might be Trevor Lawrence's favorite target. I don't know. We'll see. I really liked what the Colts did in this draft. They basically had a choice of any defensive player. There were none selected ahead of him. So whether that was Arnold, Mitchell, Jared Verse, Dallas Turner, or Latu, the guy they selected, it was going to be a good pick. And that was, like I said, it was a great pick. But the pick that stood out to me was A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver from Texas. I wasn't as high on A.D. Mitchell as everyone else was. And this is a common theme. I only had four like first round wide receivers in Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and Odunze, and everyone else was just kind of like a second round grade for me. Like, there was a tier break. But I think Mitchell at 52 is great value. They have two consistent targets for Anthony Richardson in Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, but A.D. Mitchell brings a deep threat kind of aspect to it that I don't think they have. Well, that's who they envisioned in Alec Pierce, and that hasn't worked out great. So I like what the Colts are doing, and yeah, I think A.D. Mitchell has the potential to be very good, especially in this offense. Next up is the Tennessee Titans, and I think this was my least favorite draft class out of all the teams. I didn't like Latham at 7. I thought there were three better tackle prospects, and I understand what they were trying to do with the big run blocker mauler thing, but I think Fuaga is better than Latham. Is going to be better than Latham, and I would have picked him there. And then Devondre Sweat at 38, that was higher than I thought he was going to be selected before he even got the DWI or before he had the weight issues at the Senior Bowl. And I just felt like there were better players at the position to pick, but that's neither here nor there. And they didn't have a ton of selections to choose from, so I picked a seventh rounder, James Williams, a linebacker slash safety hybrid out of Miami. I think he's going to play more linebacker in the NFL. And this guy was a highly touted five-star recruit. And although his athletic testing was less than ideal, he has this role. He had this role with Miami that it's really unique. I don't know if there's a lot of guys that could do what he did. And the Titans have Kenneth Murray Jr., they signed in free agency, and they drafted Cedric Gray out of North Carolina in the fourth round. And I think that allows Williams to not be a traditional linebacker, a traditional safety, but kind of do his own thing and specialized defensive packages. And I mean, he was a seventh round pick. He might not even make the team. Who knows? But if he does, I would be intrigued to see how the Titans use him. My favorite pick from the Chiefs was Kingsley Suamataia, the offensive tackle out of BYU. The Chiefs have a hole at left tackle, and Wanya Morris is slated to start there now. I liked Wanya Morris a lot coming out of the draft, and I liked that pick for the Chiefs to take him, but I'm not unsure of how he developed. He didn't play a ton, so I don't know if you'd ideally want him protecting Mahomes. And I like pairing another day two offensive tackle prospect with them and hoping that one of these guys hits and gives you a cheap young option at tackle. I feel like the Las Vegas Raiders, their draft was kind of hated on because they picked Brock Bowers, but I didn't get that. regardless of position, just pure football players, I think Brock Bowers was a top five guy in this class. He was a really, really special talent, and I am intrigued that they got him and how they can pair him with Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams. I think that's going to be a nightmare for defenses to try and figure out. But my favorite selection value wise was Jackson Powers Johnson, guard out of Oregon. He had a great Senior Bowl, and people were pushing him up into the first round. I remember people are saying, "Oh, could this guy be the Jason Kelsey replacement to the Eagles at 22?" And then as the draft got closer, he dropped and dropped and dropped, and he went all the way to I think there was a 40, yeah, the 44th pick, which I think is a little too far, and because he's a day one starting guard, and I think a day one starting good guard is worth that. And they're kind of rebuilding this offensive line that they lost a couple guys from in the offseason, and I'm excited to see how Antonio Pierce handles this team because I think they could be a frisky playoff team. That I'm not going to hate too much on the Denver Broncos. As much as I try and like the Bo Nix pick, I just can't. But I really liked what they did in the draft. Other than that, um, Jonah Ellis, I think, was a decent pick in the third round, a good pass rusher. Chris Abrams-Drain, they got him in the fifth round. I thought he was a third round player. Audric Estime, I think he had more burst on film than his combine showed, and I think that knocked him down his 40-yard dash at the combine. But lastly, this might be my favorite value pick in the draft is Troy Franklin. I don't know why he fell. I understand why he didn't go early second round, first round due to play strength, but this guy's production was better than a fourth round player, and his athleticism is definitely better than a fourth round player. So I don't know if there are medicals or character concerns or what, but I don't understand how fell this far. And if you're going to succeed with Bo Nix, this is the guy to put around him, a very talented receiver from his college offense. And I liked how they navigated the draft, helping Bo Nix after selecting him, I guess, because I wasn't the biggest fan of the actual selection. To finish up in the AFC, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, and I was a big fan of what the Chargers did. Joe Wall at five. I'm glad they just picked this generational tackle, for a lack of a better term. I think he was the best tackle prospect since Penei Sewell, in my opinion. And Junior Colson in the third round, he was a second round player for me. He was my favorite linebacker in the class. And then in the second round, they traded up, I believe, to select Lad McConkey. Uh, Lad is a guy that he's very similar to Keenan Allen. I can understand why they picked him. Herbert threw to Keenan Allen a ton, and rightfully so. Just a reliable target. And I think now that they traded him, McConkey can somewhat replicate that because Herbert, his weapons are kind of wild cards. Josh Palmer is okay. Quentin Johnston is not he's his hands aren't great to say the least, and like the third wide receiver is like Darius Davis, who's a special teamer. But Lad McConkey was a good pick for them, and I am hopeful about what the Chargers can become because Justin Herbert is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the league, and I think Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz coming from Baltimore can build a good infrastructure around him, and yeah, I don't know, maybe he can win just a little bit. All right, that was it for the AFC. I will be back with the same video except for the NFC. So I'll see you then.